The important point, though, is, well, let me just finish with this. They found no change in triglycerides. Now, that's very unusual. The study had a few flaws, like they didn't insist on dietary records. So you can't fault them for experimental error in the dietary records if they didn't collect them. Macronutrient compliance cannot be assured. This is a macronutrient study. Who paid for this? You did. This is supported by the NIH. Okay, so let's look at this in the perspective of what we just discovered in the textbook. You keep circulating insulin low. That's what they found. Then energy storage is not induced. Fatty acid release from the adipocyte prevents storage, and it's a good thing. You want to have high fatty acids because it's going to get oxidized by the tissues. So my question today is, how many lipophobes does it take to open a textbook? But the current trend is we thought of this first. And this is the description of a study in a online site called Cardiology Today. The bottom line is that it finds that added sugars are associated with cardiovascular disease risk. Well, I don't think they thought of this first. We've been saying this all along. Why are they doing this? This is a way of, well, the way I describe it is slouching towards low carb. It's a way of backing into low carb by first demonizing sugar. And is that reasonable? I'm going to stop and give you a brief course in biochemistry. Biochemistry of carbohydrate. And I hope you like it, as Victor Borghi used to say, you might as well. Okay, here's our short course in carbohydrate chemistry. The basic units are two simple sugars, glucose and fructose. If you've studied chemistry, you know that glucose is a molecule of 6 carbons. It folds up into a hexagonal shape. That's why it's usually represented this way. Fructose is a similar sugar, but it tends to fold up into a 5-membered ring, and we represent it with a pentagon. Now, the other common dietary sugar is sucrose. So that's table sugar. Sucrose is a dimer of 1 part fructose and 1 part glucose. And when you consume sucrose, gastrointestinal digestion leads to equal amounts of fructose and glucose. So there's a lot of studies suggesting that there may be some uniquely damaging effect of fructose concentration. But in general, this is probably only in very high levels. And there's a tendency to get carried away on this. And part of it is because fructose can be converted to glucose. That's why the glycemic index, which tells you how much glucose is in the blood, fructose is 20 rather than 0, because some fructose is converted to glucose. So the next part of the course, I try to put this in a little more global perspective. This is starch. Now, a starch is a polymer of glucose. Okay, it's many glucose molecules bonded together. So if you consume starch, gastrointestinal digestion leads to the uptake of these simple sugars, which is glucose. Now, there are specific kinds of starches, And for example, cornstarch can be enzymatically digested. Industrially, what you get from this is called corn syrup, and it's a high glucose solution, which can be acted on by other enzymes, which convert some of the glucose to fructose. That's how you make high fructose corn syrup. The enzyme is similar to what honeybees use to convert glucose to fructose. And so the high fructose corn syrup is about 50% fructose, and it's actually, the most common form is 55% fructose and 45% glucose. So for a reference point, the average fruit is about 1/3 glucose, 1/3 fructose, and 1/3 sucrose. So overall, fruits tend to be 50-50 glucose and fructose too. So this is the short course on carbohydrate chemistry, and it tells you that there are effects of both glucose and fructose. A major contributor in the diet has to be starch, and of course high fructose corn syrup, but I don't think we should get carried away. To say this in particular is bad, come on, this is serious. We've been saying all along that and we've been showing the data, that if you overconsume carbohydrates, you'll have the increase in cardiovascular risk. Now you can go back and look at just the sugar, but I don't think that's a good idea. What I'm showing you here, you don't have to know the details. What I'm showing you is the influence on fundamental molecular biology. PI3 kinase is one of the downstream effects when you stimulate cells. That's all you need to know about it, because the point I'm trying to make, this is from a very serious cell biologist, David Sabatini, very well known. And what he showed is that cancer cells that respond to a reduction in calories, if you find those cancer cells that stop responding, is because of they're continuing to produce this downstream messenger. Again, PI3 kinase, all you have to know is the name, because what you do need to know is that it's hyperinsulinemia that interacts with the PI3 kinase, and whereas the study that's published in Nature, which is a very good study, suggested that the impact of the studies were going to be able to design better drugs. Did not mention other ways of reducing insulin. Similarly, for the downstream effectors from insulin and glucose. Again, you don't have to know these. What these acronyms are for the enzymes that control fat metabolism, in particular fat storage. So all you need to know about this is this is the cutting edge of biology. This is really showing what happens with glucose and insulin. And it shows you, in fact, that there's insulin coming in and glucose coming in. What it doesn't mention, this dietary carbohydrate might give you glucose, and glucose might give you insulin. That wasn't in the table. So my take on the whole story is that carbohydrate restriction has attained the status of the name of God in Hebrew. It's never pronounced out loud. So, actually, by tradition, it can be pronounced by a high priest in the temple. Unfortunately, the temple has been destroyed. Okay, here's the metabolic syndrome. Now, I wanted to emphasize that this is really something of a breakthrough in the sense that these things are not superficially related. You know, we're used to the idea now because it's been out there, but it's a real insight that